Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and welcome everyone to the Season 1 recap of Disney Plus Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again. We're doing this in anticipation of Season 2, which drops on Disney Plus on March the 24th, Tuesday, March the 24th to be exact. And sometimes you need a little refresher, something to get you back into the groove of a TV show or a movie if they have a sequel coming out or things of that nature. And I needed it for Daredevil Born Again. I'm not saying that the show was bad. The first season was bad or anything, or it was forgettable. I'm just getting old. So chalk it up to me getting old, and I need to be refreshed. And I figured that if I'm getting older and things aren't retaining as well in my brain, maybe some of you need to be refreshed if you don't feel like sitting down and watching the first season over again, or you just don't have the time, and that's understandable as well. After all, life be lifing. And so we're going to go over season 1, a quick little review. This isn't going to be a long episode. We're not going to break down every single episode of season 1 bit by bit, piece by piece, every little Easter egg, and how did it connect to the overall MCU and all that. Some points probably will touch in on, but not a lot. So this is just a quick little refresher for your listening pleasure. I actually enjoyed the first season. It was a little uneven at points, and there's a reason for it, because you had two showrunners. The first half of the season was a different showrunner than the second half of the season. You know, they went in a completely different direction in the second half. You know, they added characters. They added Froggy after the fact. They added Karen Page after the fact. You know, they had to go back and reshoot a lot of action sequences to kind of give it a little more action, because the first little go around didn't have much action. You know, didn't have much Daredevil in it. And so they had to revise a lot of things going into the second half of the season to set up the second season. So of course it was going to be a little uneven, and you felt that. Now, for the layman, those who don't, research this stuff, you don't know that. You just watch it, and it's like, oh man, it's a little mixed here. It's a little uneven here. The tones are different here, and so on and so forth. But if you know the story behind it, you kind of understand it. It's kind of like Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. The movie didn't quite deliver, especially given the standards set by Black Panther itself. It didn't deliver. But if you knew the story behind Wakanda Forever, you kind of gave it a pass. It really wasn't that bad. And I pretty much had that same approach to Daredevil Born Again. In case you don't know, Daredevil, the TV show, first premiered on Netflix back in 2015. And it blew up on Netflix because it was gritty, it was bloody, it was real, as opposed to what we were getting in the MCU on the big screen. And so it was a change of pace from what we were getting on the big screen from all, not just the MCU, but comic book movies and properties around that time. And so when Daredevil came out, starring Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, Daredevil, it was a breath of fresh air. The last time we saw Daredevil in any form was the Ben Affleck film from the early 2000s, which I still defend that film. Yeah, I recognize the flaws, and there were plenty of them, but for what it was and the time it came out, I thought it was all right. It wasn't the greatest thing on earth, but it was all right. And so to get this version that was just so grounded, as opposed to the cosmic, super powered heroes that we were getting. Oh man, this was the bee's knees, you know? And one of the big question marks when Marvel took over Daredevil and brought it into the MCU and was going to premiere this show on Disney Plus, was it going to be Disneyfied? Were they going to cut down on the grit, on the blood, on the realism, on the cursing, on just everything that we were getting on Netflix a few years prior? And so that was the big concern, at least for me, going into this show. Now, season one, we pick up, I believe, 7 years? Well, a few years. I can't remember the number after what all took place in the Netflix show. And so Matt Murdock, he walked away from being Daredevil. He's hung up the mask. And so he's focused on just being a lawyer, just fighting crime the legal way, as opposed to being this vigilante running around on rooftops beating up criminals in hallways. So we pick up at that time of his life Wilson Fisk, who we seen in the MCU proper prior to Daredevil Born Again. He showed up in Hawkeye. He showed up in Echo, which I know a lot of people probably didn't watch, and I understand, and here on this show. But once again, reprising his role all the way back to the Netflix days was Vincent D'Onofrio as Wilson Fisk, who was perfectly cast in this role. He's a little slimmer in this show, and that's the one knock. Not one, I have a few, but my biggest knock of the show. And I'm not saying he could have put on weight, but they could have put him in a suit or something, a fat suit to give him that hulking presence that we know from the comics. But it's fine. It's fine. He still nails the personality of Kingpin. But this go around in the first season, he's been elected mayor of New York City. A criminal, which when the show came out, you thought that was kind of weird. And then what, the following year, no, later that year, when Daredevil season 1 came out last year, so that was around the election. But anyways, the presidential election, I'm saying. So life imitates art, apparently. Except for Mayor of New York, we got Kingpin in the White House now. But that's another show for another day. But in any event, so now Kingpin, he's the mayor of New York. He's consumed power. He's declared martial law. He's targeting vigilantes, namely Daredevil, but we know all vigilantes, which includes Spider-Man, Punisher, and so on and so forth, who are running around New York City fighting crime without having a badge. But we all know he's not doing this for good reasons. He's not doing this because they're doing it something illegal. He's doing it because he doesn't want these vigilantes butting into his business. And so that caused Daredevil to, or Matt Murdock at this point, to reemerge as Daredevil and go up against Wilson Fisk. So that was the setup for this first season of Daredevil Born Again. And this is where you can kind of see where these were two different shows in one season, two different showrunners in one season. The first half of the season was very, very, very political. It was leaning heavy on the politics of Wilson Fisk trying to use his seat as the mayor of New York City to continue his continue to grow his criminal empire. And we was getting a real behind the scenes look of his rise to power in that position for the first half. Now the second half, it really started to ramp up as far as pushing the story along with the action, with Punisher coming along, with Matt Murdock becoming Daredevil, and his wife Vanessa being consumed by the criminal power that she has now. And so all of that was fine and good. But let's jump into the episodes here, beginning with episode 1, which was entitled Heaven's Half Hour. And this was the first episode. We open up, we see Matt Murdock with Foggy, with Karen Page. They're celebrating the retirement of one of I guess you could, one of their informants that worked for them, that was a part of the NYPD. And they're at the bar, and while they're at the bar celebrating the retirement of their associate, we get reintroduced to Dex, Poindexter, who we all commonly know as Bullseye. He enters back in the fray, and being reprised by the same actor who portrayed him in the Netflix shows. To cut down on all of that, to stop and explain that, everybody reprised their roles from the Netflix shows, which was awesome. That was an awesome touch to this reintroduction to Daredevil in the MCU. Bullseye, he comes to crash the party, and he kills Froggy Nilsson, man. That really stunk. It kind of caught me off guard to say that was the first episode. And I mean, like, first scene of the first episode. I mean, it's like, y'all really brought him back to kill him the first 5 minutes of the show. It just blew my mind, man. I was so disappointed by that, but it needed to happen because it was a motivation or through line throughout the entire season. I get it, but it was just, I'm like, man, because I like Froggy, you know. But that leads to the epic showdown between Daredevil and Bullseye. They fought. I mean, it had to be about a 10-minute scene where they were going at it, and I enjoyed that scene. Daredevil end up he tries to. He attempted to kill Bullseye by dropping him off the roof because he killed Froggy, you know, his best friend. But unbeknownst to him, Bullseye survived the fall. But that was the moment where Matt decided to hang up the Daredevil costume. And the detective, their associate who was retiring, when Matt took off the mask on top of the roof because he assumed nobody was looking or could see up there, he looked up there and saw it. The associate, Cherry is his name. He saw that it was Matt. That is Daredevil. And so that's how that scene ends. Then we get a flash forward, I think about a year later. Matt, he officially retired as Daredevil. We hadn't seen Daredevil since that night. He's in a new law firm with a former district attorney, and Karen Page, she's moved to California. Bullseye, he was given a life sentence for killing Froggy, and the DA sets up Matt with this therapist. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, and they end up begin dating, which is probably the worst therapist on earth. You start dating your patient, but they began dating. Heather's her name. She's such a forgettable I can't stand that character. I did not like her character. I did nothing against the actress. I just didn't like the character. Now in the comics, it's a different kind of character. I think she's something. I think she's something in the comics. I can't remember, but not on this show. This show, I couldn't stand it. It's something that built throughout this season. Like, I didn't mind her in the first episode, but every episode it got worse and worse and worse. Every time she showed up, it's the way that character was written, and I just could. It made no sense. It's a pointless character. Now, could that change? I don't know, but I didn't care for it. we got Wilson Fisk. That's when this episode is when he announced that he was running for mayor, with an anti-vigilante agenda. And so, of course, this piques Matt's curiosity. And so he meets up with Fisk. They meet at this diner, and I thought this was one of the best scenes in the entire season. Not the best, but one of the best. When they talked to one another, the back and forth between those two, Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio are they're. It was like watching dancing. You know, they bounce off of each other so well. But Matt Murdock, he promises to stop Fisk if he steps out of line, and Fisk says that there would be consequences if Matt Murdock resumes his Daredevil activities. Now, in case you forgot, going back to the Netflix show or the previous episodes, because this is basically a continuation, he knows who Matt Murdock is. He knows they fought before and so on and so forth. So he knows, but he hasn't told. He's kept it under wraps. I guess to use it at the right time. But he told him it'll be consequences. You put it up. You haven't showed up as Daredevil in over a year, but if you take that mantle back up again, it's going to be consequences. So later on, of course, Wilson Fisk, he wins the election, and Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, he tells his wife, Vanessa, that he knows she's having an affair with a man named Adam. And that's how that episode ended. And so, with that being said, we know that Adam time is short here on Earth. That was an interesting nugget to put into the show. Episode 2, entitled Optics. This is when we get introduced to the White Tiger. And I was excited for the White Tiger. Reading about him in the comics growing up just randomly. Not like I was a huge big White Tiger fan, but I did enjoy that character whenever he did pop up. And the actor who plays him on this show, Kumar de los Reyes, he passed away, in case you don't know. He passed away during the film. He wasn't, I could be speaking out of turn, but it was either right after he finished or right before he finished. Maybe had a couple of scenes left, but I do know that he knew he was sick. He knew he was dying, but he wanted to do this role. He wanted this, like, to leave behind for his children, that their dad was a superhero. And man, it's so touching to hear his story. The actor who took on this role, and he did awesome in a couple of episodes that he was in. Man, it's so disheartening that he passed away, because I didn't know much about him until this, and watching him on the screen and knowing that he was in constant pain. He died of cancer. He was in pain throughout, because I looked at that as it's the same thing as a Chadwick Boseman, who for years was in pain, was sick, but you couldn't tell when you looked on the screen. You couldn't tell watching Black Panther, the Avengers films, and 28 Bridges or whatever. He gave his best, and Kumar de los Reyes also deserves his flowers as well. Rest in peace to him. But we get introduced to that character, the White Tiger, in this episode while he was in a subway station, and he comes across two men. They were attempting to, I think, assault somebody, and the White Tiger, he stepped in to fight the guys, but one of the guys ended up tripping and falling on the tracks and being killed by the train. And so the other guy, he revealed that they're police officers. So the two people he was fighting were police officers, and they arrested him at least he did, arrested him for murder of his fellow police officers. So that set up a whole different dynamic there, and it also set up the Matt Murdock side, the lawyer side. That this is what I remember from the comics, exploring the Matt Murdock lawyer side when he defended vigilantes, and you'll have She-Hulk on the other side, and that's how they end up leaking up because they're both lawyers, and it was just a cool dynamic to have on this show as Matt Murdock is trying to help this vigilante in this case, whose actual name is Hector, not just White Tiger, but Hector. And so Matt goes to meet up with Hector, asks him a number of questions about the situation, and we know that Matt Murdock has a biological lie detector system inside of him. He can hear your heartbeat. He knows when you're lying. Your heart will skip the beat because he has hyper hearing. And so with that heightened sense, he believed Hector's story and decided to represent him. And so you have Cherry now. He's working as an investigator after he retired from the NYPD. He's an investigator at the law firm that Matt works at, and he learns that Hector is the vigilante White Tiger. So Matt convinced the judge in Hector's case to withhold this information because he believed it would be an unfair bias to the jury. So to improve optics, hence the name of this episode, during his first days as mayor, Kingpin, he meets with this journalist, B.B. Urich, who reveals that the popular NYPD commissioner is poised to resign in protest of Wilson Fisk becoming mayor. So Wilson Fisk threatens to expose the commissioner infidelity to stop him from resigning. And so Kingpin and Vanessa, they start attending couples therapy with, guess who? Heather. This is where it started going down here for me. I did not like the fact that you had Matt Murdock's girlfriend being the therapist. One, she was his, and two, being Wilson Fisk and Vanessa Fisk therapist as well. Because, spoiler alert, they didn't go nowhere with that. They didn't use that. It was just, and you could tell that wasn't going to go anywhere. And it was just infuriating every single episode watching. But anyways, yeah, she's their therapist, their couple therapist, and that was what it was. So Matt, he tracks down the guy that the two cops were beating up in the subway, Torres. He tracks him down and helps them escape from him because they came back to kill him. They hunted him down to kill him. And the corrupt cops, they have tattoos of a skull and a symbol that is very, very similar to the Punisher. And so they got those tattoos on them. And after the quick little fight in that apartment building, that was the end of that episode. We move on to episode 3, entitled The Hollow of His Hand. And this episode begins with Wilson Fisk and Vanessa. They avoid their previous criminal activity while Kingpin is mayor. And you have two gang leaders at this time, Luca and Victor. They begin to fight amongst themselves, and Kingpin believes they should let the gangs kill each other to help build a kind of a peace, if you will. But Vanessa is frustrated that her work is being undone because she took her time. She built this little coalition of gangsters, that they all work for her. And you have Kingpin who's coming in there and just poo-pooing on all of her work and causing these rifts and all this because he's trying to do things differently now that he's mayor. And that's causing a bigger rift or gap between these two who already are on the outs because she is doing the boom tune with another guy named Adam. And so there you got all that going on there. Uh uh Vanessa, she sends Kingpin's right hand man, Buck, it, to order Luca to pay $1.8 million in restitution to Victor in order to smooth things over. And so meanwhile, you have Cherry. He brings Torres to testify at Hector's trial, but Torres is intimidated by the police, obviously, and says that he was never assaulted by those cops. So that went nowhere. That was a lost cause there, understandably so. I don't know what they were thinking, from a character standpoint. Oh, like what y'all thought was gonna happen. You knew that people was gonna intimidate them to not testify on their behalf. So it is what it is. But it's good they went that way. Keep it real, because any other way would have been super non-believable. But anyway, with no other options, you had Matt. He reveals that Hector is the White Tiger. He does this in court, in an act of desperation, since his one witness turned on him. So that shifted a lot of the weight over to their side in this trial. He was criticized by the judge and the district attorney for being a hypocrite at this point, because he fought so hard not to have that revealed during the trial. And so you had that going on. You had a new witness accounts and police records detailing Hector's heroic deeds as the White Tiger start to emerge. And then you have Matt. They him and his team, they successfully convinced the jury to find Hector not guilty. And so in an interview with BB Urick, Kingpin, he denounced the trial's results and vows to uphold this anti-vigilante stance. So despite Matt's warning that Hector should stop being White Tiger, Hector goes out on patrol one night and he is murdered by a man wearing, wait for it, the Punisher symbol. And that's where the episode ends. This was the one episode that it really locked me in. It took me 3 to get truly locked in. I was on board with the first 2, but I was locked in after this. This was a really good one. It was no action in this episode. You didn't see any fights. You didn't see any mass vigilantes. You didn't, other than the very last scene when White Tiger is in his getup and gets shot. That was it. You didn't see nothing. It was all courtroom drama and marital drama, I guess you could say, between Wilson and Vanessa. But this was a really, really good episode that kept me super on board. We move on to episode 4, Sigma Systema, I guess. I don't know. It's Latin. But anyways, in this episode, you have Matt. He's confronted by Hector's niece, Angela Del Toro, who, if you followed her in the comics, you know who she is. She becomes the White Tiger later on. Spoiler alert. But she confronts Matt to tell him that she believes that the police are responsible for Hector's death. But you have Matt, who comforts her with the hope that the killer will be brought to justice. Matt, his optimistic self there. And so at marriage we move on to the marriage counseling session between Kingpin, Vanessa, and Heather. And in this particular session, they discuss Vanessa's affair with this Adam guy. And Heather, she privately asks Vanessa if she felt safe with Wilson. Is it do you feel like he's going to kill you or whatever? And Vanessa gives a kind of vague answer, nothing concreted, but kind of leaves us in suspense there. Wilson, he has a plan to rebuild this Red Hook port, which faces several hurdles and roadblocks, with the politicians and the political procedure of it all. And so it isn't just, oh, I'm gonna take it over. No, it is a lot going there. You have gangs infighting that's taking place around him. His prodigy, Daniel Blake, and he's portrayed on this show by Paul, not Paul. Oh man, Tony Soprano's son. It doesn't matter. Anyway, this is another character. Now, it kind of in the reverse of the not Rebecca, but Heather character. Whereas she was all right at first and she got worse going forward. I didn't like Blake first. I didn't like the character at first, but as the show went on, I started to like him a little bit more. I didn't feel it fit the show. Like I said, the show was two different shows. And once we got to the latter half, I started to enjoy that character more. But Blake, he drunkenly leaks details to BB Urich, who reports that Wilson Fisk is a union buster. And so once all that comes out, oh boy, we thought at this point it was grand opening, grand closing for Blake, not Blake, but Daniel Blake at this point. But despite his anger, Wilson Fisk decided not to fire or kill Blake. So when the latter explained his deep loyalty, boy, that sounds familiar. And so he he decides to take him under his wing. Later on, we get Matt Murdock. He's investigating the site of Hector's murder and finds a bullet casing with the Punisher symbol on it. So he tracks down Frank Castle. And yes, once again, reprised by John Bernthal, who is the Punisher. He was born to be the Punisher. And I didn't see that coming. When he was first announced back in what that was, 2016, whatever, on Netflix, I was like, John Bernthal from The Walking Dead. Shane from The Walking Dead. I don't see that. I just didn't. I couldn't picture it in my head until I saw the symbol on his chest, and then I saw he dove into. There is no other Punisher. I didn't have a problem. R.I.P. to Ray Stevenson. I thought he did pretty good. And the movie wasn't that good, but he was good as the Punisher. And Thomas Jane, I don't even count that as a Punisher movie, but I thought it was all right. I thought he was all right in it. But John Bernthal is Frank Castle. Anywho's, he pops up in episode 4 after Matt tracks him down. And there's a nice back and forth between Matt and Frank about Matt is expressing to Frank that he needs to take responsibility for these people misusing that Punisher symbol. That's not what you stand for, and so on. It was a nice back and forth there. Frank calls out Murdock for not making sure Bullseye was dead when he threw him off the building. It's such a Frank Castle thing. I'm telling you, man, he is awesome as Frank Castle. And so later on that night, Matt, he practices with his Daredevil Billy Club. Wilson Fisk is eating dinner next to this cage that is holding Adam, the man who was having an affair with his wife. And we have a mass serial killer on the loose who is draining blood from his victims. We get introduced to Muse, and that's how episode 4 ends. I thought episode 4 was, once again, another notch up, man. It was a really good episode. Once again, not any action. There was no action in this episode, but it was story driven, character driven, and it was entertaining, to say that it didn't have any action in it. But at this point of the season, I stopped looking for it. I really stopped looking for action. I had set in my mind that this is just going to be a character driven show. And so if I got some action, cool. That's just a cherry on top of the sundae. But as far as a action packed show, nah, I had thrown that out my head up at this point. So I wasn't disappointed. Like a lot of people were online around this time when episode 4 dropped. I didn't feel that way. So, but I do understand. I do understand what the expectations were. Episode 5, which was entitled "With Interest," this is set on St. Patrick's Day, and I believe it was released on St. Patrick's Day. This particular episode last year, but I could be wrong. But I know it was close to. But anywho's, Matt Murdock, he goes to the bank to discuss a loan for his law firm, and his application is denied by the bank manager, who is Yusuf Khan. And you may ask yourself, well, who is Yusuf? Well, we get our first tie-in to the MCU proper. Yusuf Khan is the father of Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. And so that was a good little crossover there. Nothing big. Didn't have to have Kamala. You were cool. And if you watched all of the Marvel shows and all that there, that was a nice pickup there. And it fit. And that's what makes this particular show so special, because all of the grounded characters can pop up and connect to this bigger universe without having Robert Downey Jr. pop up, or Chris Evans, or Chris Hemsworth, and all. You didn't need the big stars and all, but you couldn't afford them anyway. And so you can use these smaller characters, because this is a smaller show. This is a grounded show. And I like that addition to this show, especially with his character, because coming off of Miss Marvel, which is basically a comedy, and putting him in this gritty crime drama, it's a weird mix, but it's a cool mix. But he wasn't cool at that point, because he denied Matt Murdock a loan. And it was due to the firm's take on clients that can't afford to pay. You taking on these pro bono cases and all this here, you'll never repay the loan. So the bank is like, no, no, we're not giving you a loan. And so soon after Matt leaves, a group of criminals enter the bank and take everybody hostage. They work for one of those gangsters. I think it was Luca. I think they work for Luca, and are attempting to steal the $1.8 million that he needs to, pay to Victor, that he was ordered to do by Vanessa. And so Matt Murdock, he hears them, and he goes back to the bank. So by then, the police had arrived. Matt Murdock also arrived. He takes out 2 of the robbers, while Khan, Yusuf, he stalls for time at the bank vault, and Matt Murdock, he opens the vault, and they find a rare diamond that the robbers are targeting. And so Matt Murdock, he pretends to give the diamond to Devin, who is the leader of this little crew, and he faked them out on that one. So Devin, he disguised himself as one of the policemen, and he leaves out the bank. But he gets caught by Matt Murdock a little later on. I would say injured. He beat him. He beat the fire out of him. And so later on, Matt Murdock, he secretly returned the diamond and accepted an offer to have dinner with the Khan family. I thought that was cute. But that was basically that episode. Episode 5 was just that. I guess they needed to give an action episode. You got a little action here with some of the fighting and whatnot. But it was kind of a throwaway episode. Even though it was interesting, even though it did push the story along, it wasn't as exciting as you would think. to say it was an action heavy episode. Once again, at this point, I was out of the action business. I didn't care about the action because I was so wrapped up in the story. When I finally did get action, I was like, eh. But anywho, moving on to episode 6, which was entitled Excessive Force. After the robbery failure, Luca finds Fisk and refused to pay the $1.8 million to Victor. So Kingpin was like, cool, you don't have to pay the 1.8 million. Now it's 2.8 million and gave Luca a week to pay it. And so he learns that the city, I'm talking about Kingpin at this point, he learns that the city sanitation department, that Muse is using human blood in his street art. So Muse later leaves bodies of 2 victims next to this mural as the public starts to confront his actions. So Kingpin, he decides to, in order to deal with this Muse thing, he established the anti-vigilante task force, the AVTV or the AVTF, with additional powers, and they recruit these notoriously corrupt police officers, just like the ones that were wrapped up in the White Tiger murder case. And boy, this sounds so familiar. This sounds so familiar. A government man of power assembles a team to go after a certain group and uses this group with pretty much full immunity. And man, this sounds so familiar. Anyways, we jump back over to the Angela, who is Hector's niece. She believed that Hector was investigating Muse before his death, and she asked Matt Murdock to continue on this investigation. But of course, Matt Murdock, he refuses. So she goes herself, and while doing this herself, she gets abducted by the Muse. So once Matt is alerted of her disappearance, he finally goes and takes the Daredevil suit out of mothballs and dons it one more time. He finds Muse's lair, he fights the Muse, and he rescues Angela. But unfortunately, Muse gets away. Meanwhile, Wilson Fisk, he gives Adam an axe that chop down trees and stuff. Yeah, he gave it to him and challenged him to a fight in which Wilson Fisk beat him and dragged him back into the cell. I mean, beat is the most PG way I can tell you what he did. I mean, he just kill me. Just kill me, man. I mean, he beat the mess out of Adam. But anyway, that's how that episode came to an end. We move on to episode 7, Art for Art's Sake. We open up this episode with Angela. She's recuperating, and she tells the police that Daredevil saved her and directs them to the lair that Muse had. And one of the policemen, Kim, the detective, she reports to Fisk. And she informs Fisk that Daredevil has returned. And of course, Wilson Fisk did not like this. But Kim did alert Wilson Fisk on who the Muse's true identity is. And so elsewhere, we got Luca telling, or at least he asked Vanessa to return to her criminal activity behind Wilson Fisk's back. And then in another session with Heather, one of her clients, who is the gentleman who is the Muse, he thanks her for her help, and he because she brought it out of him to embrace his true self, his true identity. So he did that. So Heather realizes that he's the Muse, and the muse knocks her unconscious. And this is why I didn't like the character. Once again, nothing against the actress. It wasn't her fault. It's almost like Heather is the only therapist in New York City. Everybody goes to her. Conveniently, conveniently around this point in time of this story. Look, I know it's television, it's comic books, it's all that. I know it everything is ex machina, but bruh, it was just so blatantly obvious. It was dumb. I felt patronized. And I hated that. I hated it. I hated it because of that. But anyways, getting back to the episode, uh, while in the lair, Matt, he's out of the costume now. He's investigating alongside this anti-vigilante group. And they're in there going through all of the evidence, and he sees a painting, one of the paintings of Heather. And so once Matt finds that, he realizes who Heather's client is, and he rushes off to save her. Now, as Daredevil, Matt, he arrives at Heather's office. He rescues her, and he begins to fight Muse. At the same time, you have this task force. Tired of calling them the anti-vigilante. Is twisting me up. So this task force who are preparing to enter the office, and so Heather, she fatally shoots Muse before fainting. And Matt Murdock, he stabilized her injuries before the task force arrives. Wilson Fisk, he gives credit for stopping Muse to the task force and publicly declares them the heroes. Man, it sounds familiar. And the episode comes to an end when we find Heather recovering, and she tells Matt that she heard Daredevil say her name. And Vanessa seemingly sends Luca to kill Wilson Fisk, but it was a trap, and Luca was killed by one of the henchmen that they have on their payroll. And that's how the episode 7 comes to an end. We move on to episode 8, entitled Isle of Joy, the penultimate episode of the season. We normally the second to last episode is the biggest, baddest one of the bunch. It wasn't. Before we go through it all, I'm gonna let you know it wasn't. It was all right, but it wasn't a. Oh man, can't wait for the season finale. I mean, it did set up some good stuff, but especially at the end, I think the very end was banger. But as far as the episode and story moving forward, not too much. But anyways, let's jump into it real quick. Bullseye, he's moved from solitary confinement to the general population in prison. This is all due to Wilson Fisk's orders. He also, Wilson Fisk, that is, he also revealed his imprisonment to Adam and to Vanessa, and watches as she kills him. Yeah, Vanessa kills Adam. And so he promotes Blake as deputy mayor of communications and invites Heather to this black and white ball fundraiser. And of course, that means that Matt Murdock will be there hand in hand with his girlfriend at this Wilson Fisk fundraiser. And so Matt, he realized that Fisk is one of Heather's patients, and of course this throws a monkey wrench into their relationship, talking about Heather's and Matt's, because she tells him her anti vigilante views. And this is where it was over for me with Heather. I was done. I knew it was a reason I didn't like the character, but this episode, this scene, did it. You were literally just saved by a vigilante, and you're saying you don't like vigilantes. You can't stand them. You wish they were gone. You know, if it wasn't for vigilantes, you would be dead. It's so real if you if you look on social media, it's some of these MAGA folks. But it is so crazy that you would have this stance, and it was a stern speech that she gave, Matt. You know, like, oh, how dare, it was dumb. Don't know why that character exists. I just don't get it. Anyway, moving on with the episode. Matt had went back to the bar where Froggy was murdered, and this is where he learned that Froggy was celebrating a court win the night he died, and he believed that Fisk hired Bullseye to silence Froggy. And so Matt, he interrogates Bullseye to the point he fought him, he injured him. And Bullseye later kills his doctor and the guard before he escaped from prison. But Matt was trying to get down to the bottom of who hired him and why he was hired to take out Foggy. Now we're at the ball, and we see that Wilson Fisk, he is up to no good there. He's blackmailing some of the patrons there, and in order to gain support for this Red Hook project. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock, he puts two and two together, and he finds out that it wasn't Wilson Fisk that hired Bullseye to kill Froggy. It was Vanessa Fisk that hired Daredevil, not Daredevil, Bullseye to kill Foggy, and he confronts her. And so Wilson Fisk, he starts to tell Heather that her good old boyfriend is Daredevil. And so before he can get out that confession, Bullseye shows up. He shoots at Fisk, but Matt Murdock hears it and jumps in front of the bullet, and he is shot. And that's how the episode ends. This, like I said, it ended on a good note. It was sputtering through this episode for me. I was like, it was really all of the Heather stuff. I don't know what it is about that character. It just does not land with me. But anywho's, yes, we have a bloody Matt Murdock laid on the floor as it fades to black in this episode. But we have one more remaining, and that is episode 9, Straight to Hell, the final episode of season 1. Bullseye is able to escape the ball while Matt Murdock, he is hospitalized with his gunshot wound. Wilson Fisk, he cuts off the power to New York City in order the henchman, I can't think of his name, the henchman to kill Matt Murdock, who escaped to out of the care out of the hospital. And who shows up to find him is none other than Frank Castle, the Punisher. He finds him there at his apartment, and he fights off the task force. And in the only way Frank Castle knows how to fight off officers, he went full Punisher on them fools. We get another reunion when Karen Page shows up, and she's the one who convinced Frank to protect Matt after learning that Bullseye had escaped. And so Matt and Paige, they track down this Foggy case that he was working on, and he discovered that this Red Hook is a free port, and that the Fists are trying to turn it into their own city state, if that makes sense. It's a independent sovereign city, if you will. It's separated from the United States and their laws and regulations and rules and whatnot. So they're trying to turn that port into that, to whereas they can do whatever without, the United States government, police, any type of authority figure being over their head. And so Frank Castle, he fights this task force at Red Hook, and he calls them out for using his symbol. And so he ended up being captured by the task force. Wilson Fisk, he learns that Gallo is, I guess, planning a coup, trying to undermine him, and brutally crushes his skull. and I mean brutally. it was it was the goriest thing I've ever seen on Disney Plus. I mean, he crushed his skull with his bare hands. It was beautiful. He turns the power back on and he declares martial law, and he outlaws vigilantism. He imprisons a couple of people along with Castle, uh, uh, other people who were against this Red Hook project. He offers Heather a position at this mental health commissioner position or whatever, and she accepts. I can't stand that character. So Matt, he recruits Cherry, that officer Kim, officer Detective Kim, and some other police officers who were on the level, the honest ones, the good ones, to resist Fisk and save the city. And so in the mid credit scene, we see Frank Castle, who was imprisoned. He tricks one of the prison guards, and he manages to escape capture, and that's how the season ended. This was it was a nice end because it set up what we're going to get in season 2. I think season 2 is going to be all out war, and when you look at it from that perspective, this was a good season. It set up so much. It had a lot to do. It really did. It was a lot of heavy lifting to do, and that's why I kind of accepted the story driven element of this season, because next season I would imagine is going to be action packed. I mean, we're getting Jessica Jones in this season. The Punisher is returning. It looks like Daredevil is going to be full bore. We getting full Matt Murdock in this season coming up. So I'm excited for what we got in store, and it was all set up by this season, and I think they flushed everything out. There's really no need to go back and have these drawn out episodes like we did before. I hope that the showrunners here find a way to equally balance it out. I don't need action every single episode, fighting and blood and all that every single episode, but I do definitely need more than what we got this first season. I mean, because it was none in the first season, and there's no reason to drag it out talking for an hour every week, because we know what the story is. But I enjoyed season 1 for what it was. Super excited for season 2. I hope that this recap helped you get geared up for season 2, or maybe my long talking and unwarranted commentary turned you off of season 2. If it did, I apologize. I still watch it. I think it's gonna be really, really good. I would like to know, are you excited for season 2 of Daredevil Born Again on Disney Plus? Let me know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to Movie Goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this recap of season 1 to Daredevil Born Again. I'll see you for season 2 on Disney Plus, March the 24th. Want you all to know that I love you, continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.